So today we are going to read something about Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life. The Canadian psychologist, sociologist Irving Goffman revolutionized how we perceive human interaction, building upon Charles Cooley's Looking Glass Self. Which Looking Glass Self states कि जो भी हम लोग इंसान हैं, हम वो नहीं हैं जो हम एक्चुअली हैं, हम वो हैं जो एक्चुअली हमारे आसपास के लोग हमें समझते हैं. Like we are how we have interacted with people and what people told us about ourselves. बचपन से ही ये प्रीसेट होता है. So इसी के बेसिस पे एक गॉफमैन है जिसने प्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ सेल्फ इन एवरीडे लाइफ दिया है. ही सजेस्टेड दैट आइडेंटिटी इज़ नॉट एन इंटरनल एसेंस. आइडेंटिटी जो इंसान की होती है वो इंटरनल नहीं होती है. इंस्टेड ही आर्ग्यूड दैट आर सोशल लाइव्स फंक्शन एज अ सीरीज ऑफ theatrical performances. Okay, the illusion of true self. Goffman's most radical claim involves the nature of identity. Most people believe in an inner core or a static authentic self. बहुत सारे लोग बिलीव करते हैं हमारा कोई ऑथेंटिक सेल्फ है या हमारा इनर कोर है, लेकिन गॉफमैन हाउएवर viewed the self as a phenomenological product. और उसने इसको ऐसे नहीं देखा कि हमारा कुछ ट्रू सेल्फ है या कुछ आइडेंटिटी है. He stated this as a phenomenological product, meaning it is the result of social interaction rather than cause of it. He argued that personality is merely the sum of the various roles we play. Our personality is the sum of various roles we play. A self is attributed to us by audience only after successful performance. Okay, therefore we do not have a self, we perform one. हमारा खुद का self कुछ नहीं है. We just perform various self of ours. This is a dramatical metaphor. Goffman proposed that we are all actors on a social stage. Like there's a social stage and we are performing, right? So we all are actors here. We constantly strive to convince our audience that people around us that we possess specific traits or statuses. So he stated कि हमारा इनर सेल्फ कुछ नहीं है, सब परफॉर्मेंस पे बेस्ड है. हम परफॉर्मर्स हैं, ये एक स्टेज है और हम कॉन्स्टेंटली जो हमें लगता है हम हैं वो परफॉर्म करने की कोशिश करते रहते हैं ताकि हमें बाहर के लोगों से वैलिडेशन मिले. To make this performance believable, individuals utilize various sign vehicles. These are the cues such as clothing or speech patterns that we use to convey information about ourselves. मतलब और उसी रोल्स को प्ले करने के लिए हम वेरियस स्पीकिंग लैंग्वेज यूज़ करते हैं, हम वेरियस क्लोथ्स पहनते हैं टू कन्विंस आवर ब्रेन्स एंड पीपल अराउंड अस कि हम वो हैं जो हम एक्चुअली हमें लगता है हम हैं. Impression management. At the core of this theory lies impression management, also known as self-presentation. This is conscious or subconscious process where people attempt to control the perceptions others for them. Okay, conscious और subconscious process. So जो ये थ्योरी है इसका बेसिस सेल्फ प्रेजेंटेशन जिसको हम इम्प्रेशन मैनेजमेंट में बोलते हैं, ये बोलता है कि सबकॉन्शियसली और कॉन्शियसली हम अटेम्प्ट करते रहते हैं लोगों के परसेप्शन हमारे बारे में चेंज करने के लिए या फिर रेगुलेट करने के लिए. ओके, इसका गोल रहता है वी आर अ क्यूरेटेड पब्लिक image to influence others or maintain a favorable identity. The motive, social interactions are often driven by the desire to produce a specific effect rather than honest self expression. जो भी हम social interactions भी करते हैं वो बोल रहा है कि उसमें भी ह्यूमन की बेसिक डिज़ायर इज़ अ स्पेसिफिक इफेक्ट कि हमें कुछ स्पेसिफिक उस इंटरेक्शन से चाहिए rather than ऑथेंटिक एक्सप्रेशन. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, हम कहीं पे किसी शादी में बहुत तैयार होके गए हैं, उसमें हमारा मोटिव क्या होगा कि हम सुंदर दिखें, कुछ दिखे, तो हमारा कुछ स्पेसिफिक इफेक्ट चाहिए ना हमें. लेकिन अगर वहीं कोई इंसान हमें जेन्युइनली बता दे कि तुम बहुत तैयार तो ही हो लेकिन लाइक दिस कलर इज इन सूटिंग यू, तो हम एकदम से ऑफेंड हो जाते हैं कि पर दिस इज़ नॉट व्हाट वी वांटेड टू हियर, राइट. Region of performance, front versus backstage. To navigate diverse environments, Goffman divided our social world into two distinct regions. The boundary between these areas help us maintain social dignity. The frontal stage. The frontal stage is a public sphere where we perform our social roles for an audience. In this region, our behavior remains polished and professional. We actively project a person that aligns with social expectations. For example, a waiter in a dining room stays in character by remaining polite and attentive. Okay. The backstage. Conversely, the backstage represents our private lives where the audience is absent. Here, the performer can finally step out of their formal role and relax. The same waiter might complain about difficult customers once they retreat to the kitchen. Goffman warned that bringing backstage behavior in front stage often causes profound social embarrassment. So Goffman stated कि दो रोल्स प्ले करते हैं हम, फ्रंट स्टेज, बैक स्टेज. और जब हमारे दो क्यूरेटेड रोल्स हैं, जब हम बैक स्टेज वाले रोल को फ्रंट स्टेज पे लाएंगे, दैट इज काइंड ऑफ एम्बैरेसमेंट फॉर अस. Define the situation. For any performance to succeed, there must be definition of the situation. Okay. This is collective agreement among participants about the nature of the expectations of a social setting. Individuals use props and settings to signal how others should react. A doctor wears a white coat and sits in a clinical office to define the interaction as a medical consultant. If the audience and actor agree to the signals, the play runs smoothly and social order is maintained. Now there is another thing called MED's conceptualization. George Herbert Mead transformed our understanding of human identity by viewing the self as social process. Okay. There's another man, George Herbert Mead. उसने भी ये बोला था कि जो ह्यूमन आइडेंटिटी है वो सोशल प्रोसेस है. ठीक है. While early psychologists viewed the mind as isolated entity, Mead argued that identity emerges through social communication. Okay. He built upon Charles Kuhl's looking glass self, a concept stating that individuals shape their identity based on how we perceive them. Okay. Mead explained that this by focusing on how we internalize the perspectives of our entire community. Okay. Okay, we'll read this one. This seems a little interesting. So, there's a contrast in the looking glass self versus social process. Coley viewed the self as a entity, meaning he believed the self exists primarily as a private internal experience. Okay. He argued that we develop a sense of who we are by perceiving how others judge us. मतलब he states कि जो भी हमारा सेल्फ की जो भी चीज़ है that's totally private and internal, लेकिन it depends on how others judge us. This internalizes external opinions into self feelings like pride or shame. In contrast, Med viewed the self as an ongoing social process. पहले वाले ने बोला कि जैसे लोगों ने हमें परसीव कर लिया हम खुद को वैसे ही परसीव करेंगे, लेकिन सेकंड वाला मेड सेड कि एक ऐसा नहीं कि एक बार किसी ने कर दिया परसीव तो ऐसा रहेगा. इट इज़ एन ऑन गोइंग प्रोसेस. ही डिनाइड दैट सेल्फ वॉज प्योरली मेंटल और हिडन इनसाइड द ब्रेन. उसने बोला कि ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि जो हमारा सेल्फ है वो प्योरली हिडन है, हमारे ब्रेन के अंदर है. इंस्टेड मेड आर्ग्यूड दैट सेल्फ इज अ कॉग्निटिव एक्टिविटी लॉग्ड विद द फिजिकल और सोशल वर्ल्ड. इट इज़ अ मेड सेड कि जो हमारा ट्रू सेल्फ है दैट इज़ अ कॉग्निटिव थिंग, but it is also logged with our physical and social world. To Med, you cannot have a self without an active relationship with an environment. Okay. Now there's another topic called passive reflection versus active role taking. Cooley's theory relies on the metaphor of a mirror. We understand our entity by observing the interactions of others and seeing our reflection in the appraisals. This suggests of somewhat passive role where we simply absorb the signals sent by those around us. Med explained this by introducing active role taking, which is the ability to mentally step outside oneself to view the world from another perspective. Humans exist in a symbolic environment. We use shared language to interpret meaning rather than just reacting to stimuli. By taking the role of other, we become active participants in shaping our identity through symbolic thought. Okay. The reflexive structure I and the me. Med introduced a dynamic structure to the self that fully lagged. Med ने एक dynamic structure introduce किया था that the previous one lagged. He noted that humans have a reflexive nature, meaning they have the capacity to turn their attention back to themselves. Humans का एक usually reflexive nature होता है कि no matter क्या हो रहा है आसपास किसी का क्या हो रहा है, but they have a ability to return back to themselves, attention अपनी तरफ लाने के लिए. This makes person both the actor and the object being acted upon. Med divided the internal dialogue into two distinct phases, the I and the me. उसने internal dialogue को दो distinct phases में बांट दिया, I and the me. The I, spontaneous subject. The I represents the subjective role or the impulse and creative aspect of our personality. It is active observer. I is someone who is very actively observing. That acts thank you in present moment without immediate concerns and social rules, because the I is the force doing the acting. You cannot perceive it directly as an object. Okay, it represents your unique unscripted response to the world around you. तो I जो है वो सब्जेक्टिव है, ठीक है, और एक्टिव ऑब्जर्वर है, और I is the one who is doing things. ठीक है. Me In contrast, me is objective self, which consists of internalized attitudes of others. It acts as social filter that evaluates your behavior based on community standards. Me is someone who is objective और वो खुद का ही behavior evaluate करेगा, ठीक है, community standards के हिसाब से. We come to know the me through reflected appraisals, which are the perceived judgments we receive from others. और हम उस me को जज करते हैं बेसिस ऑन कि कौन सी चीज़ बाकी लोग अच्छे से बाकी लोगों की नज़रों में ठीक है या बाकी लोगों की नज़रों में गलत है. Essentially the me is image of ourselves we see when we look through the eyes of society. हाँ, आए कौन है? तुम हो जो कुछ कर रहे हो, जो कुछ नहीं कर रहे हो, तुम बस कर रहे हो. मी कौन है? जब तुमने कभी खुद को देखा होगा कि तुम खुद को जज कर रहे हो, तुम खुद को ओवर एनालाइज कर रहे हो, कुछ कर रहे हो, तो तुम अपने आप को देन यू आर एक्टिंग फ्रॉम द परस्पेक्टिव ऑफ मी, क्योंकि तुम देन यू आर बिकमिंग द ऑब्जर्वर, यू आर ऑब्जर्विंग योर सेल्फ फ्रॉम द आइज ऑफ द सोसाइटी. Developing a generalized other. Okay, so the sociologist Cooley observed that individuals possess multiple selves because our reflections change depending on who we are with. Med formalized this growth by explaining how our social audience broadens as we mature. As children grow, they move from simple imitation to the play stage and eventually to the game stage. In the game stage, they encounter the generalized other, which refers to collective norms, values, and expectations of the whole society. Rather than just pleasing a parent, the individual learns to evaluate their behavior against the broader roles of community. हाँ, ठीक है. It just stated कि कैसे बचपन में हम हमारे सोशल ग्रुप से अलग होते हैं, बड़े होके इट चेंजेस, और हम बस अपने पेरेंट्स से हट के पूरे कम्युनिटी के बारे में सोचने लग जाते हैं. Symbolic interaction. The concept of looking glass self is associated with a school of sociology known as symbolic interaction. Symbolic interaction is a micro-level theory that focuses on meaning attached to individual human interactions as well as symbols. Okay. So it is a graph like society, symbols, establish meanings, develop their views, communicate with each other. Okay. Okay. So next thing is the foundation of shared meaning. At its core, symbolic interactionism posits that humans act towards things based on specific meanings those items hold. Okay. These meanings are not inherent. Instead, they arise through social interactions, which is the process of acting and reacting to those around us. Because we share common language, we inhabit a symbolic environment or a world defined by shared representation rather than just physical objects. Through constant communication, individuals internalize social norms and rules. This collaborative process ensures that social reality is not fixed but constantly being recreated. Stages of development from play to society. The mirror self does not appear instantly but expands through specific developmental stages as a child. Early reactions. Infants initially evaluate their conduct based on memories of parental reactions. Pretend play. Children engage in specific gestures, imitation, where they practice adults' attitudes by playing roles like doctor or parent. Okay. Children engage in significant gesture imitation where they practice adult attitudes by playing roles, okay, like doctor and parent. Structured games. Older children must learn the roles of all participants simultaneously. They begin to govern their actions according to shared rules rather than just individual whims. The generalized other. Eventually, the individual internalizes the generalized other, which is the collective viewpoint of entire social group or society at a large. The digital mirror. Okay, the looking glass self in the social media age. Okay, so this now there's book कि ये चीज़ social media age में कैसे work कर रही है. This theory remains relevant in 21st century. While the mirror one consisted of face-to-face cues, it has transitioned into digital interferences. Social media performs new functions as quantified mirrors where social feedback is no longer subtle but explicitly measured. Okay. Quantified appraisals and feedback loop. In traditional settings, we rely on social cues, non-verbal signs like eye contact or tone of voice to gauge how others perceive us. Digital platforms replace this nuance with quantified appraisals, which are numeric metrics used to measure social value. लगता है ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट था पढ़ने के लिए. The mechanism: likes, shares, and content provide immediate objective data or social standing. Emotional impact: a high like count triggers effective validation or a positive emotional state fueled by social approval. Conversely, a lack of engagement can lead to societal dysphoria, a state of unease or dissatisfaction with one's concept. Hype curated impression management: because we imagine how our digital audience views us, we engage in impression management. Okay, this is the conscious or subconscious process in which people attempt to influence the perceptions others form about them. Digital frontal stage: sociologist Ervin Goffman expanded ideas by suggesting we all are performing or performers on a front stage. Social media is ultimate stage, offering tools for selective self presentation. ठीक है. Curation: users edit out flaws and apply filters to broadcast only highlight reels. Asynchronous communication: unlike real time speech, digital posts are asynchronous, meaning they do not happen at the same time. This delay allows users to craft more thoughtful, polished versions of themselves, reducing social anxiety. The rise of digital narcissism: the ability to constantly monitor one's digital reflection has led to increased narcissism or an excessive interest in oneself or one's physical appearance. The selfie culture is a primary example of looking glass self into action. By posting a self-portrait, an individual seeks a specific reflection from their audience. Research suggests that this constant loop of self-promotion and feedback seeking can make self-worth entirely dependent on external digital affirmations. Multiple selves of virtual identities. Cooley noted that we process multiple selves depending on which mirror is or social group we are facing. The internet amplifies this by allowing for online disinhibition, a phenomena where people feel more free to express themselves online than in person. Experimentation: users can adopt alternate personas or avatars in virtual worlds. By observing how digital community reacts to a new trait, a person may eventually integrate that trait into their offline identity. Heightened self-awareness and comparison. Social media often triggers a state of objective self-awareness where we view ourselves as an object to be evaluated by others. Damn. The triggers: seeing an unflattering tagged photo or a video of oneself. It's simulation game, huh? Seeing an unflattering tagged photo or a video of oneself forces us to adopt the perspective from an outside observer. हाँ, मतलब जब किसी ने हमारी कोई गंदी फोटो अपलोड कर दी है तो हम अपने आप को ऐसे नहीं देख रहे थे कि मैं हूँ, हमने अपने आप को एक आउटसाइड ऑब्जर्वर की तरह देखा था, इसलिए मैं ज़्यादा ट्रिगर करता है. सोशल कंपैरिजन: वी फ्रिक्वेंटली कंपेयर अ डिजिटल रिफ्लेक्शन टू आवर इंटरनल स्टैंडर्ड्स or idealized lives of others. The result: if the digital image conflicts with our ideal self, we experience psychological discomfort. This often leads to untagging photos to escape negative reflection. Empirical validation, social media, and self-esteem. To understand the weight of these digital mirrors, research have examined to link between social feedback and internal self-images. The impact of likes on adolescent self-esteem. Okay. This is an experiment. The aim was to investigate the number of likes received on social media directly influences an individual's sense of self-purpose and self-esteem. Procedure: participants were asked to report their lives of self-esteem and sense of purpose. They then posted a photo to mock social media platforms and were randomly assigned to receive a low, average, and higher number of likes. Findings: participants who received more likes reported a significant boost in self-esteem. However, Those who with a strong pre-existing sense of purpose were less affected by low counts. Okay. Conclusion. The study confirmed that digital metrics act as a potent looking glass. For many, these quantified reflections directly dictate their internal self-image, validating this theory in modern context. Critical evaluations. This provided a groundwork for understanding social identity. Modern psychology clarifies that the mirror is never passive. Okay. It is highly mediated by our cognitive filters and social motivations and a deep seated need for self esteem. We do not simply see ourselves in others, we choose which reflections to believe. A primary refinement of this theory is that the mirror is not mechanical reflection or a direct or unbiased copy of reality. Instead, humans are active processors who interpret social signals through existing beliefs. We do not passively absorb how others see us, rather, we filter their views through our own internal frameworks. Because we hold pre existing opinions about the people judging us, we may dismiss or amplify their feedback. This makes the self concept a subjective interpretation and internal conclusion based on personal feelings rather than factual data. Consequently, the self we build is often construction of what we think others see, which may differ significantly from the actual opinions. The ego and the self-esteem motive. While Cooley suggested that we build identity based on others' evaluations, he underestimated the self-esteem motive. This psychological drive refers to a strong innate need to view oneself as competent, good, and decent people. To maintain this positive image, individuals often employ a self enchantment biases, a tendency overemphasize positive traits while ignoring flaws. Aim to determine how individuals process positive versus negative social feedbacks regarding their personality. Researchers provided participants with both glowing and critical personality evaluations from peers and tracked which details are remembered. Participants consistently recalled positive feedbacks with high accuracy but forgot or discredited the negative feedbacks. Looking glass is often rose tinted, okay, as people selectively use social reflections to protect their own egos. Motivational moderators of a mirror. We do not treat all social media mirrors as equal. Modern research indicates that looking glass effect is conditional, meaning it only functions under specific circumstances or motivations. We are most likely to adopt the perspective of others when we experience a high need for affiliation or a desire to get along with and be accepted by specific person. If a close friend holds a specific view of our character, we are highly likely to internalize it and maintain social harmony. Conversely, the reflections of people who dislike or do not value often have little to no impact in our self image. Thus, the mirror only works when we are motivated to see ourselves through a specific person's eyes. Fluidity and the concept of multiple selves. Hello. One of the greatest strengths of this theory is that ability to explain the fluidity of identity or the way our personality change over time. Because we interact with different groups, we perceive different reflections depending on whose viewpoint we adopt. This suggests that idea of multiple selves, the concept that an individual possesses different identities tailored to different social roles. This aligns with social constructionism, a theory stating that the self is not a static inner entity but a constant process. As Cooley famously noted, the individual and society are two sides of the same coin. We cannot separate who we are from social world that constantly reshapes us through interaction. The mechanism of looking glass self varies significantly across the globe. Okay, so culture also plays a role. Independent construal. In many Western cultures, individuals define themselves through internal thoughts and personal achievements. Here, the looking glass is used to validate personal uniqueness. अच्छा, Western cultures में जहाँ पे people already have some internal thoughts and personal achievements, they use this to validate that uniqueness of them. Interdependent self-construction. In many Asian cultures, individuals define themselves through their relationships and social roles. In this collectivist societies where the group is prioritized over the individual, the looking glass is more potent. Wow, so nice. So मतलब what I observed and learned is कि however we perceive ourselves is not who we are, is how we have understood how people see us. Okay. मतलब आई अंडरस्टूड कि हमें मतलब हम खुद को ऐसे देखते हैं कि जैसे बचपन से हमने देखा है कि हमें लोग कैसे परसीव कर रहे हैं. इट स्टार्टेड फ्रॉम द अर्ली चाइल्डहुड, जब हम बचपन में जब हम इन्फेंट्स होते हैं और हम अपने रिएक्शंस चेंज करते रहते हैं एज टू हाउ आर पेरेंट्स उस पर कैसे बिहेव कर रहे हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अ चाइल्ड क्राइज, जब उसको भूख लगी होती है तो वो रोता है, तो उसको लगता है रोने से खाना मिलता है. बट द थिंग इज़ कि मैं दोनों हो गई. हाँ, बट द थिंग इज़ व्हाट आई लर्नड इज़ कि ये भी जो भी चीज़ें हैं इट डिपेंड्स ऑन वेरियस फैक्टर्स. पहला फैक्टर ये है कि ये चीज़ तब काम करेगी जब तुम इंटरनली बहुत वीक रहोगे, लाइक इफ़ यू डोंट नो हु यू आर, जो कि एशियन कल्चर्स में है ही नहीं, क्योंकि बचपन से एक्सटर्नल चीज़ों को ज़्यादा वैलिडेशन दी जाती है. बट इन वेस्टर्न कल्चर्स जहाँ पे वी हैव सीन इंडिविजुअलिज्म और जहाँ पे इंडिविजुअल को ज़्यादा प्रायोरिटी दी जाती है, वहाँ पे ये चीज़ें थोड़ी कम हैं. मैं ये लाइव बंद कर देती हूँ बिकॉज इट विल बी लॉन्ग, है ना. और पीपल वुड एक्चुअली वांट टू सी. बंद कर देती हूँ, फिर बाद में वापस से चालू करती हूँ.